Buenas tardes todos y todos. Gracias por estar con nosotros. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being with us. I'm José Atiles. I'm an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Puerto Rico, Illinois. And I'm the moderator of this conversation or this cafecito or afternoon tertulia. And I would like to start by introducing my colleagues and my co-editors, Joaquín Villanueva, who is a critical human geographer based at the at the Gustavo A College in Minnesota, and a graduate of the University of Puerto Rico and Syracuse University. He has conducted research on urban political economy and carceral geographies in Paris, New York, and San Juan. Gustavo García López is also with us, is a scholar activist from Puerto Rico working on with environmental justice movement and common initiatives for transformational path toward more just ecological work. As you well know, we're launching the special issue of a CENTRO journal dedicated to the study of corruption. And we're very lucky to have with us some of the authors, 4 of the authors or contributors to this special issue. With us, we have Elizabeth Perez Chiques, who is a researcher professor at the Centro de Investigación y Docencia Económica, División de Políticas Públicas, Division of Public Administration. Her research agenda focuses on government, corruption, public personnel management, and policy implementation. Also with us is Dr. Patricia Virella. Dr. Virella is an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Leadership at Montclair State University. And her research focuses on implementing equity-oriented leadership to leader responses. We also have, or also is joining with us, Dr. Mayra Velez-Serrano, who is an associate professor at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras campus. Her research and teaching interests include comparative institutions, regional paradiplomacy, integration, and China's foreign policy. And finally, but not less, Jean-Paul Lopez Cepero Virella, who is a PhD student from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. His research interests focus on legal mobilization and the Puerto Rico Constitution and issues on eminent domain and abuse. Thank you so much for being with us. Look forward to the conversation, and Joaquín Villanueva will be providing us with a general introduction of the special issue.
Thank you, Jose and Gustavo, my co-editors and co-conspirators. This is I'm very excited to CENTRO for hosting us today and really working with us over the last 3 years. So we've been working on this special issue from conception to realization today. I'm really happy to have it in my hands. It's really I'm very proud of this work. It actually is like a book, so it's really heavy, has a lot of content, and we'll be talking about some of it today. And so what I wanted to do was to just simply provide the audience here today a little bit of a history of how we conceived this project, how it came about, and what ended up appearing in this issue. And then I'll invite Gustavo and Jose to jump in at any point they want to add anything. But pretty much like we were at the dawn of the summer of 2019 when, you know, the people of Puerto Rico took the streets to take down the former governor of Puerto Rico. allegations of corruption. So we've been thinking about it for a while, but before then, like I know the three of us have worked on corruption either directly or indirectly in our work, and we have been in conversations about like, how can we think about corruption in critical ways? And then the summer of 2019 happened, and that really gave us like sort of the impetus to really think about corruption as a theoretical unit, to really think about corruption in Puerto Rico seriously. And so when we were looking at sort of, we presented our work in different conferences. And so we were invited by Centro Journal back in the day individually to publish our work. And we decided, well, if we're all working on corruption, why don't we organize a special issue? Because I think this will generate some interest. So the Centro Journal decided, agree with our proposal. And so we moved forward. And to our surprise, we issued a call for paper, and we had over 30 abstracts submitted, which is impressive, right? Which really speaks to the importance of this topic to understand contemporary and historical Puerto Rico. It's corruption so central, but there's never been, surprisingly, a space to really dedicate to the study of corruption in a systematic way, from different perspectives, right? So this special issue provides that, right? So after that call for paper, we things happen. We ended up with actually 15 articles in this special issue that are interdisciplinary in nature, that are dealing with a great diversity of methodologies, modalities, theoretical approaches from political science, geography, sociology, anthropology, literary scholars, I mean, you name it. And so we have like qualitative research, we have quantitative research, and we have a wide range of scholars really targeting this particular question of corruption in Puerto Rico and with Puerto Rican communities in the United States as well. In this special issue, I will add that because we have a wide array of approaches, that we really try not to narrow down the definition of corruption to one single one. So we really try to open up what corruption meant. And so for many people, and so one approach that we adopted in the introduction and throughout for us to conceive corruption is to treat it as a narrative, as a discourse, right? It's a discourse, a narrative that is used by different groups for different purposes, right? So we'll see some of the authors here today with us that corruption for a government official might mean some particular form of actions that they can target through policy, but it might not address the structural aspects that make corruption so debilitating for the people of Puerto Rico. For the people in the streets in the summer 2019, corruption might mean entirely different from the definitions that government officials provide, right? So we try to really think about corruption in critical ways, try to think about the different narratives that different groups mobilize in order to organize their collective actions, either against the state, against capital, or against environmental movements, and so forth, right? So we try to provide here a wide definition of corruption. But second, our objective is to also start a conversation, because we know we couldn't include every single paper that we wanted. We couldn't include every discipline, methodology in the special issue. So one thing that we're really trying to do in this special issue is to introduce a conversation. This is not the end. This is not the authoritative sort of account on corruption in Puerto Rico, but rather hopefully the start of a critical conversation. And so we really try to, in the introduction, to really think about what does a critical corruption studies have to do with Puerto Rican studies. So we're really trying to bridge these conversations together to see what can come out of it. And so hopefully today's conversation, the special issue, is part of a broader attempt by scholars, activists, journalists to really think about corruption more broadly and as a potential category to mobilize our collective politics as well. I'll stop there, and I'll invite Gustavo or Jose if they want to add anything else before we move on with the panelists.
Thank you, Joaquin. Gracias, Joaquin. I would like also to mention that in the audience, Sara Molinari and Karian Soto Vega are joining us, who are also contributors or authors in this special issue. So big shout out to them, and thank you for joining us. Gustavo, please go ahead.
No, just say thank you to everybody who is here and to everybody who made this possible, and who contributed to the volume or proposed contributions that we couldn't include. I remember when we started talking about this, it feels like a long time ago, but I feel very happy that this volume is out, also because now I feel like we can actually retake some of the ideas that we had around. Like, for instance, we had thought one of the first things we started to talk about in relation to this when the Verano 2019 was happening, because corruption was such a central issue. Now we thought, let's do an encounter or a series of jornada around corruption, where we can have scholars and activists coming together. So I think maybe this issue is an excuse now to go back to that idea and to do like a jornada in Puerto Rico around this issue, and maybe take it also in other places where we are based, and to have these conversations around what is corruption, how does it really shape power relations, how colonialism and capitalism are related to the corruption dynamics and the discourses around corruption in Puerto Rico. So thank you.
Thank you. So I wonder if the authors, Patricia, Elizabeth, Jean-Paul, Mayra, would like to share with us a little bit of your papers or some reflections about your papers and the process and the areas that you are studying now or engaging with. So please.
I can start. So I was there when the protests happened in Puerto Rico in 2019. I was visiting my family, which I normally do, down there for the whole summer. And I thought it was super interesting to watch the number 2 totally shut down. I've never seen anything like that. And to be part of that moment was incredible. And then right after that, this idea of Kelleher's corruption was bubbling up. And what I thought was interesting and what was the impetus for the paper, so the paper comes out of my dissertation work where I was studying the education reform law that got pushed through right after Hurricane Maria. Was a policy window. And so I was very curious to see how this neoliberal reform would operate in a place, like Puerto Rico. Similarly, what they did in New Orleans was, trying to do this in Puerto Rico. And what I found absolutely stunning when I was talking to people who work in the education system on the island, was how easy it was to just take this money away, and how easy it was to really ignore what the possibilities were to encourage a progressive public education in Puerto Rico that would allow, students to really engage with the world around them. And so I definitely started to notice that at the same time that the corruption scandal was happening on the island, Kelleher was at Yale talking about the success of the reform and how wonderful this was going to be and all the media attention. And so, what I really wanted to figure out was how was this corruption only in the education sector being reported on, and what was the common threads that were coming out. And so that was the impetus for the paper. And it was, very prevalent and tethered to the education reform law. And so I got very interested in knowing more and how that was presented. So that's how I started to work on that. And then, now for my studies and how I keep an eye on the island's education system is seeing how the things are happening and how the law is being implemented. And so one thing I'll share in the follow-up work that I've done, I've been talking to some principals, and just the lack of resources and thought behind how students are coming back to the island after Hurricane Maria is just not there, right? So I thought it was interesting. One principal she shared with me, she's a principal in Bayamón, that she's getting a lot of kids that speak only English because they've been, they were very small and then they went over to the States and then they've come back to the island. And so they don't have equitable funding. And so, she's wondering, those things that we were supposed to get during the corruption scandal that we didn't get, would that have been helpful for us now as we return, these students return? So that was a little bit about the paper and where I see it, other areas of research going.
I would like to add, we're thinking about the concept of corruption. In our case, when we think about corruption, we usually think that a politician is gaining some type of private gain. That could be from bribery or stealing money. But what our argument is that corruption is a little bit more sinister than that. It's a process in which a politician, for private gain, and that private gain could be just to be reelected, excludes big sector of the population and in favor of his reelection or in favor of private groups. And this is important because I think fundamentally corruption is anti-democratic. And this is something we have to keep in mind. It's not just on the issue of being immoral, an issue that, it shouldn't be done because it's illegal. It is because it goes fundamentally against the values of democracy. And I think when I joined Jean Paul in his project, and I think he can talk a little bit of why made him study this community, it was precisely because we were seeing this process of a community being excluded for the gains of special interests and for the gains of the Guaynabo major, ex-major, right? So I think Jean Paul can talk a little bit of what made him go into that community and what was happening, and how they fought the powers to be.
And I will jump in directly into that line of thought. What made me really invested in this project and this community was more because I live nearby the Bay of San Juan. So I have been living and seeing the dynamics of displacement over the Bay. And it's actually more pertinent today to keep an eye on the Bay of San Juan and how it reflects to other places in Puerto Rico. So for the case of Vietnam, I was more invested on the question on how we see process of gentrification more recently and settler colonialism, but how a powerful municipal administration uses all its resources to displace a community with its own power directly, which is expropriation. So in line with that, seeing more, getting invested in the community, how it get emptier and emptier, and through legislative accounts to court proceedings, how every scenario was in favor of the municipality of Guaynabo, in this case, to displace a community. We ended up with this view of many political projects, private projects, being invested in or going to be invested in this community, which were different developers behind these projects. And what I was and continue to see is many of these persons keep investing in many of these projects in Guaynabos while paying their political dues to maintain the political power. And it's not exclusive of what we are seeing today with the current mayor of Guaynabo, Edward O'Neill. So many more to analyze from what it has been portrayed in our writing.
Hi, so I focus on personnel practices, specifically informal personnel practices. I am very interested in the perspective and experience of public employees in Puerto Rico. and how partisan politics affect their work conditions beyond trust employees. So it's career employees, it's transitory employees, and how these practices relate to other phenomena, such as other activities that are recognized more as corrupt. Informal personnel practices are very driven by confianza, by trust, and it's based on political party affiliation. It's based on mainly on our family ties, and that's something very hard to deal with, right? So we are talking about trust between people, and distrust, and how this trust, confianza, drives a lot of selection in personnel management. And it can be subtle, it can be very subtle. Giving confianza to someone can be very subtle. It doesn't have to give a position to. So all these changes as political parties change have interested me immensely. And in the article, I focus in how these practices that are so normalized that public employees don't refer to them as corruption. They might say it's unethical or even illegal, but they don't usually use the word corruption to address it. There's all these rationalizations of it's like a very robust informal system in personnel management. So I look at how these practices relate to other government failures or other corrupt schemes, and that's something like I continue to be interested in, and I continue to study, but I'm trying to capture it always from the perspective of the people involved or directly affected by it.
Elizabeth, I think you're muted.
Yes, that's all I have to say for now.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't know if Gustavo or Joaquin, would you like to talk about your specific articles, or if we should go ahead and take questions? It's completely up to you guys.
I just want to highlight from what Mayra, Patricia, and Elizabeth said. No, I think is the importance of understanding corruption not only as an illegal thing, no, not only as something that is, I think, or even unethical. I think Elizabeth mentioned, no, it's understood as unethical, but not as corruption. Mayra said is not illegal, but it's unethical, but it's not really a problem about morality. So I think this is very important, no, this beyond the legality discourse about corruption, because this is where we are, no, in Puerto Rico, and I think it's a kind of a liberal democratic principle that you have some laws, and if you break them, then it's corruption. If not, it's. But you have, for instance, things like what Mayra and Jean Paul were saying, no, of using certain projects to advance your electoral career, your personal electoral career, even if the projects are not good for your community. That should be considered corruption, no, even if it's not illegal not to do it, or these personal things that are illegal but borderline kind of, or when of course stealing money is a very clear one, no, but even then what Patricia said stuck with me, how easy it is to do it, no. I think this is also something to consider. What are the power dynamics, the structural dynamics that facilitate it, the discursive dynamics, no. In Patricia's article, the issue of a woman and educated, also an American woman, also these different kind of intersectionality is kind of perversely used in a way to kind of discursively legitimize corruption, basically, and to hide it, no. So just to highlight some things that came out, and I don't know if you want to say, I mean, yeah.
Can I add something to that? Because I think, Elizabeth, what you were saying was so interesting, because I think about a lot of the research I had to do for this paper and finding out that like most of the corruption in the world happens in the global South. So it's like this consistent oppression of this like European elite coming in to pilfer, on a variety of levels, for personal gain, and just how systematic it is in Puerto Rico now. One of my dad was telling me about, there was a guy in a town who was, doing some corruption schemes to get Rolex watches, right? Like, it's just everywhere. And so this idea that, people can't even really, or don't name it as such, right? How in line with this assimilation of oppression have they really taken on without knowing that? To me was like striking.
This is fascinating because I always say that I'm not an expert on corruption. I wouldn't even consider myself a scholar on corruption. I just stumbled upon this topic. And the funny story is I was asked to write about corruption. I was like, I don't know anything about corruption. And someone said, but if you study Puerto Rico, you should know something about corruption. So it speaks to that, like what Patricia is saying, it's everywhere, no? And so my question to the panel is, because it did something to me when I started thinking about corruption as a framework, to think about the things that I was investigating to frame them as corruption. It made me think about it in different ways. It made me think about it more systematically. It made me connect practices that I thought like were not connected, to connect them in a particular way and to frame it in a particular way that allowed me to see it more clearly. So I'm wondering if the authors here had a similar experience or different, where, what did corruption as a framework help you sort of see, realize, and how help you sort of see your research in particular?
I will go ahead here, and I think Jean-Paul can also jump if he wants. It's true what Joaquin was talking about. Thinking about corruption made us realize that there's a lot of processes that we assume that just are political processes. They are so ingrained in the political culture that we assume that this is how things are done, and we don't see it as they are, that are corrupt acts. So Patricia talks about the Rolex, right? This is the mayor of Catania that awarded contracts in exchange of cash and Rolexes. Then he just walked around with them, clearly very stupidly, right? Because if you acting incorrectly and illegally, you shouldn't be parading around, right? What you're doing. And that is one way of seeing it, but there is other ways that are not necessarily as clear cut, and that are very ingrained in our political system, that are also associated with this capitalism that Gustavo and Jose was talking about. Are these private, very powerful private interests that capture the political process in exclusion of the majority. And this is something that we sort of understand as normal, and especially in context of United States politics. We talk about corruption in Puerto Rico, but we cannot ignore that a lot of these corrupt practices are also ingrained in American politics. And that's the bread and butter of American politics. That's how things are done. That's how senators come into Congress with just their cash in their pocket, and they leave being millionaires. That's not their salary. So, right. So we have to be also very aware that a lot of the processes that we see here in corruption are also things that we see in the United States, and are part of our relationship with the United States and our colonization. We also have adopted this type of practices, but unfortunately, it's highly institutionalized. It's really hard to talk about how we can eliminate corruption when this is very, very institutionalized, in the sense that the institutions like political parties accept that this is how things are done and have no commitment of changing it. And this is something that I think it's very, it really breaks your heart in a sense.
Yeah, and our paper, I think we capture that in many ways of what is the literal experience of the American politics, how it works. For example, when I was starting this project, I was aiming to just problematize two concepts in constitutional concepts, public use, and I was like, how can you use private economic projects to justify a public use? So in the name of displacing a community, you can just justify it by building hotels and casinos, and how that translates to the Puerto Rican experience. Also, the concept of just compensation. How can, and for the case of Vietnam, how can the mayor of Guaynabo can just say, hey, you need to sell me your house for the price I'm giving to you, and you cannot appeal that price. And in the end, people who accepting to relocate ended up just losing millions and a lot of amount of money that today that is not realized, and that is, for me, was considered corruption. But also we introduce the concept of mediate corruption, how political actors can receive from key owners donations to just streamline process or just make process that benefit his political campaign, and it's in a sense not similar to the experience or different to the experience of what we see of handing out just cash or Rolex or La Junta de Pasteles, which was the case of Angel Pérez in Guaynabo. So Guaynabo is just an epicenter of corruption, but we see this in many ways that we think this is just a part of a normal and just escape our mind of things that are in reality should not escape our mind of when we're considering corruption.
I'll jump in. I think the corruption framework is difficult to use sometimes because there are so many different definitions, because everything seems to be corruption. If we focus on well, sometimes everything seems to be corruption, and it's so like discursively, it's consistently used or abused to justify different governmental actions, and it can be confusing, right? So I find it useful to look at it like very context specific, try to figure out what role or what function it has, the specific type of corruption that we are seeing, like what function is it performing? What is it telling us about a potential need that we should be addressing formally? I find it very, very useful. Like James Scott talks about corruption as being like in the same continuum with violence, and that sometimes corruption, because people can access money or can access some other things, gives opportunity to people that would not have it to interact with governments that are sometimes very elitists or based on, very elitists, for example. So then that helps me think of corruption in terms of what function does it perform. Also, like in the case of personnel practices, like I was mentioning, confianza, it can work. It can be good. It can have good effects. So it's not that it's all bad, but we have to figure out like what effect is it having and how can we fix it. Understand the informal systems. Sometimes these practices, selling Rolexes, what is it telling us about the municipality, about the politics in the municipality? So I try to look at it that way, so I don't get lost in trying to understand what I'm looking at.
If I might follow up to or piggyback what Elizabeth was just saying, like a great point of what corruption tells us about what is missing, what is lacking, right? And I would like also to think about, also Elizabeth just pointed it out, of when we think about corruption, what are we thinking? And it seems sometimes that everything might be corrupt, or that every social political process and power dynamic are embedded in corrupt practices. And in that sense, I see a lot of comments and questions. Thank you so much. And I would like to think about the media. And the first question that Federico posed for the panel. But I would like to think about narrative of corruptions and talks, corruption talks. And I would like to think about what this specific narrative, ideas, and definition of corruption are doing to Puerto Rican politics, but also to the Puerto Rican polity. So I would like to think about anti-corruption discourses and anti-corruption policies, which is what I've been doing in the recent years. And this is an ongoing conversation with Joaquín and Gustavo. Sorry, guys. But oftentimes this kind of generalization, oversimplified definition of corruption, or definitions of every politician as corrupt, what does is ended up delegitimizing, undermining Puerto Rican local government, Puerto Rican municipal government, but also enable the imposition of anti-corruption oversight institutions such La Junta, right? La Junta is very much the result of an anti-corruption scheme or an anti-corruption discourse, right? Puerto Rican politicians were not taking care, we're spending too much, therefore we need to impose a technocratic kind of, the story. So anti-corruption discourses can have a negative impact and can undermine Puerto Rican capacity to deal with the crisis, the multiple crises that Puerto Rico is enduring, and can further create the conditions of vulnerability that will exacerbate the crisis in itself. And I think Fiona is a concrete example of how anti-corruption discourses can have and can undermine and can kill, right? So I think one of the topics that this special issue brings about is to think not just about corruption, not just about local discourses, not just about media, not just about local social movement, but also the consequence of US discourses of corruption, US policies, and how that has undermined Puerto Rican capacity and autonomy at large. And I know we are kind of short in time, but I would like to, that we have some time to take some questions and ideas. Sorry for extending myself.
I think there is one comment question that is about, how is corruption shaped by capitalism, or is capitalism a problem for corruption? There was a comment there by Blanca Vasquez. Isn't corruption a major feature of late capitalism writ large as it pivots away from democracy? And then Federico made a comment that kind of to debate that. So maybe to hear from y'all about this issue, and maybe the colonialism can also go in there, as Jose's commentary was suggesting.
I would like to answer a little bit of Federico. He wrote a really good book about communication and corruption, which I think everybody, if they have the opportunity, they also should get a copy of that, which it's a great book, and actually I'm using it. And The reason I'm using it is that recently I started collecting data on tweets from all the politicians of Puerto Rico, and I pinpointed when the corruption scandal appeared in the newspapers, and I wanted to see what politicians said that day and a few days after that, and who said what, like what party said what. And what I found, I wanted to see if there was a discussion of reform or something. What I'm finding is that politicians just go on full blast cheap talk. They talk about everything else, congratulating high school seniors, except the issue of corruption. So that you see here, right, how the strategies of especially the two main parties, how they try to ignore the issue of corruption because they know it's ingrained in their own parties. It wasn't surprising that the only one that talked about corruption and reforms were the minority parties, the PEEP, the MVC, the PD. So, I think if you have an opportunity to get that book, but I think it speaks volumes to this issue of how what Elizabeth was talking about, how the discourse of corruption.
I can also add very quickly that in the article that I did, it did look at newspaper articles around the time, and similar to a lot of newspapers, and I think this piggybacks off of something that was just shared. It was very sensationalized, and so there was a lot of conflict framing. And so what I think is interesting is, what was talked about a little bit ago is like, other than the large corruption scandals, what are the other things that are permeated in the system, right? The bureaucratic practices that could function as, or be labeled as corrupt, but those are really underneath this like flagrant, we're going to take this person, there was this huge problem. And so I thought that was interesting in looking at the media. I thought it was also interesting, quite honestly, that the media aligns themselves with, I looked at Primera Hora and a few of the other bigger newspapers. They aligned themselves with a more Republican conservative party view, but they were very critical of the neoliberal policy, which is something that I don't know that you would necessarily see in the US. Because I think what was coming out was the municipalities and the local governments and just like the orgullo, right? Like, these are our kids. This is our community. So I thought that was interesting too, to see in the media. And I'm also literally just am going to buy your book. So thank you for writing it.
I want to jump in very quickly here because there's a segue for one more question that is on the chat. But it seems like the conversation is shifting toward, which is fantastic, not like what is corruption and naming particular sort of actions, but rather like people are interested in what is the relation between corruption and structures. So people are asking questions about what's the relationship between corruption and capitalism, or corruption and colonialism, right? And so that's something that we try to do in these special issues, to start that conversation about like what is the relationship between corruption in relationship with these larger structures that shape Puerto Rico. No, it's like Puerto Rico is a colonial capitalist country, that features a lot of the contradictions of late capitalism, but also of colonial society. No, so what does it mean to speak about corruption in that particular context, right? And so I think that this I don't think we have the definitive answers here, right? But shifting the conversation to that is particularly one of the objectives that we have with the special issues. Just start really thinking about these larger structures. And so, Gustavo, I don't know if you want to raise that one last question or in the chat.
No sé. There was a question here that I think is, what does it mean to talk about corruption in the absence of democracy? And what does it mean to talk about corruption when fiscal management have been used and continues to be deployed to justify the abrogation of democratic political process? From Chris Lesser. Somebody want to take that question? The big one. Yeah, I mean, it's something that also I think the special issue contributes to in some of the articles in different ways. But So we don't have to have an answer here but if anybody wants to.
I mean, I can very quickly say that it's important to remember the play that corruption has played, the place that corruption has played in colonialism. Colonial discourses have been central to justify many instances of colonialism. This is a point that Joaquin has made in his now classic article on corruption narrative for NACLA, right? Corruption undermines and serves the purpose to justify colonialism under the idea that colonial people are unable to for self-governance. And this is something that we have seen time and time again, since the insular cases to more recent debates around Promesa, and even when Wanda was arrested, some colonial, very colonial discourses of corruption were present in the international media, right? And the cover, how that arrest was covered. There was a really important question before we move on. Eric asked in the chat if there is an analysis of kind of a psychological approach, and we have a really great paper in our special issue entitled "Exploring How Colonialism Blamed Puerto Rico for Its Corruption." The authors are Cristina Capiello Rosario, Hector Adames, and Nancy Muro Rodriguez, and that is an excellent paper in which they analyze how people start thinking about corruption, especially in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. So strongly recommend, strongly recommended. Sorry, I don't know.
I will wish to jump in and based on the experience that I have recollecting from the case of not just Vietnam, but from Guaynabo, and actually we can see this everywhere. And in considering the relationship between how these narratives undermine politics capacity, Puerto Rican capacity to do good politics. And what I would like to say and emphasize, and I don't want to make this claim on the paper, unfortunately, is that these politicians and this relationship with key donors and politicians are just product of colonialism and savage capitalism. So in the way that these key donor interests do not only donate to one political party, but two political parties at the same time, these interests do not have political party affiliation. Just if they see in their interest, of course, they're gonna donate in lines of political affiliation. But these key donors do not have a sense of political party affiliation or a conception of a nation, or no tienen patria, they no tienen nación. And what they do at the very last, the result of this is just they maintain these politicians that are not product of representatives of the people, if not of these interests. So we are seeing that these interests are just upholding these actors that are in essence representative of something else that do not represent what we should deserve as good governance in Puerto Rico, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, we're nearing the end of this great panel. And this is what we suspected will happen. We'll get sort of involved in this conversation about corruption. We forget about time. There's so much more that we wanted to address here. There's so many more papers, and I feel like there's many more panels to be organized and created, and this conversation should be happening more broadly. I think there is a need in Puerto Rico and the diaspora to really have these conversations and these spaces. And hopefully this is the beginning of that. Of course, the guest editors don't have to be there all the time, but like I hope that the contributors of the special issue also feel free to organize your events, because I think these conversations are so people need it. People are willing to have these conversations in different settings. I don't know if anyone wants to sort of add some final words, final thoughts, aside from the fact that I hope that you buy the special issue, or you gain access to it, that you read it, that you engage with it, that you engage with the authors, the ideas there, and that you add to the conversation, because I do think that we're just scratching the surface when it comes to corruption in Puerto Rico. Jose, Gustavo, you want to say anything else?
I would like to yield my time to Patricia, Mayra, Elizabeth, or Jan Paul, if they would like to just have a closing remark. We still have 4 minutes, so please go ahead.
I think we should keep the conversation.
Sorry, Elizabeth. Just quickly, I had to head out. Thank you to the editors of this number for putting this together. And I see a lot of people on the panel that I think future collaboration is going to happen. But I just want to say that, yes, corruption might be ingrained, but it's not something unique to Puerto Rico. And I think it's very important that we don't think that all the worst is always happening to Puerto Rico. That's also a colonial mindset. This is not unique to Puerto Rico. It doesn't mean we cannot solve it, even though it breaks our heart, but we have power to do changes. And I think I want to leave this with an uplifting note.
I completely agree with what Mayra is saying, and I think we should, with that mindset, also keep the conversation going. And very grateful for the invitation. Thank you.
Same. Thank you so much for the invite. And, from a little girl in Spanish Harlem, this is a dream come true. So thank you for having us, and keeping the conversation and research going.
Thanks as well. Nothing more to add. Just thanks for the opportunity given here. Gracias.
Thank you, everybody. Sorry I had to get out of the office. They were closing. So thanks, everybody, for this discussion and for all the attendees and questions.
Thank you all for joining us. And I hope that we can continue the conversation. Just a big round of applause for the panelists. And thank you.